Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're really getting into a major one, the India-UK Comprehensive Economic and Trade Agreement, or CETA.
Big stuff. Absolutely. It's been in the works for a while, but it really hit the headlines recently.
Yeah, with that trade mission led by the British PM Keir Starmer.
Yeah.
You probably saw the clip doing the rounds. Starmer, standing in the cockpit of a plane heading to Mumbai,
Oh, yeah.
announcing they were leading the biggest trade mission to India the UK has ever sent. Very enthusiastic.
It was quite the moment politically, but the reaction online was, well, instantaneous historical humor, wasn't it?
Completely. It just blew up. People immediately jumped on the phrasing, drawing these pretty pointed parallels to the East India Company, centuries ago.
The irony was just too much for social media to resist.
I saw so many posts. Things like, a similar crowd came centuries ago via ship. Or joking the real biggest trade mission was back in 1600, and, well, we all know how that played out. It taps right into that shared, complicated past.
It does, and it's sharp humor. But underneath the jokes, it really highlights something important, doesn't it?
What's that?
Just how much the economic balance has shifted. Centuries later, the UK is sending this mission not as a dominant power, but really seeking to boost its own economy post-Brexit.
Right.
Through a partnership, a negotiated one with India, which is now, the world's fifth largest economy. It's a total flip.
That power dynamic shift is exactly the frame we need. Starmer wants this deal implemented as soon as humanly possible, he said. So, okay, let's get past the memes. What's actually in this thing? How does this huge CETA deal actually reshape ties between these two major economies?
Well, first off, just the sheer size and scope. It was signed July 24th, 2025. That was after 14 pretty intense rounds of talks that started back in 2022.
14 rounds, wow.
Yeah, it's massive. We're talking 30 chapters, over 2,000 pages. India's commerce minister called it, and I quote, the most comprehensive trade deal India has negotiated. So, high stakes.
And it's positioned as the economic core of this new India-UK Vision 2035 plan, right?
Yeah.
The ambition seems enormous.
It really is. Bilateral trade sits around, $60 billion now? The goal is to double that by 2030.
Double it.
Yeah. And the longer-term projection is like a 39% surge overall by 2040. That's about $25.5 billion added annually. Huge numbers.
So how do they plan to achieve that? What's the basic mechanism?
At its core, it's about cutting tariffs on goods. But it's structured quite differently for each side, which is interesting.
Okay.
For India, the win is massive and, crucially, immediate. 99% of Indian exports heading to the UK get duty-free access right away. Bang. Covers almost their entire export basket.
99% immediate access. That sounds very asymmetric up front. How does the UK pull that off without facing huge pushback from its own industries? I mean, which UK sectors are suddenly facing zero tariffs from Indian imports?
That's a great question. It seems like a strategic calculation, really. The UK is likely focusing that immediate access on areas like consumer goods, maybe some textiles where they don't have large competing domestic industries needing protection, or perhaps where the overall gain from the rest of the deal, like services for the UK, was seen as worth this initial concession. It's sort of the price of admission for the UK's longer-term wins.
Okay, makes sense. So let's focus on those Indian wins first then.
Yeah.
The labor-intensive sectors must be seeing a big impact.
Oh, absolutely. Take ready-made garments, RMG. Before CETA, Indian garments faced, I think it was a 9.6% import duty going into the UK.
Right.
That duty just vanishes immediately. Gone. That puts India on a level playing field instantly with competitors like Bangladesh who already had preferential access. It's a game changer for them.
And it's not just garments, right?
No. We're expecting similar boosts for Indian exports in leather goods, footwear, gems, and jewelry, and also marine products. That last one could be a really significant lift for India's coastal economies.
Okay, now let's flip it. The UK side. How do their big consumer goods get into India's market? The classic example everyone talks about is Scotch whiskey.
Always Scotch, yeah. And the numbers here are dramatic. Currently, the import duty on Scotch in India is, it's a whopping 150%.
Ouch.
Yeah. Under CETA, that drops immediately to 75% as soon as the deal kicks in.
Yes, just like that.
Just like that. And then it phases down further to 40% by the 10th year, though that depends on something called the minimum import price. But still, that immediate halving, it makes UK spirits way more competitive overnight. You can bet the first celebratory toasts involved some cheaper Scotch.
I bet. Okay, what about the other big UK SCARs, the auto sector? That involves this TRQ system, tariff rate quotas. Sounds technical. Can you break down what a TRQ actually does for us?
Sure. Think of a TRQ as a sort of compromise mechanism. It lets a certain volume of imports, that's the quota part, come into India paying a much, much lower tariff.
Huh.
But imports above that set volume, they still face higher duties, although those might also be reduced somewhat from pre-CETA levels. It's a way to give UK brands market access without completely overwhelming India's domestic car manufacturers.
So for these completely built units, CBUs coming from the UK, the tariff drops from, up to 110% and down to 10%, but only for a limited number of cars.
Exactly. Only within that specific quota limit.
And India's structured these quotas in a really interesting way, hasn't it? It's not just about volume. It seems to be pushing a specific agenda.
Precisely. This is where you see India embedding its own long-term strategic goals right into the trade deal clauses. It's quite clever, actually.
How so?
Well, look at traditional cars, the ones with internal combustion engines, IC vehicles. The annual quota for those starts reasonably high, about 37,000 units, I think. But then it actually decreases over time. After the initial period, it drops down to 15,000 units for the next 10 years.
Wait, the quota goes down. Why would the UK agree to less market access for its traditional cars later on? That sounds like a loss for them.
It does seem counterintuitive for the UK side, but it shows India's leverage here. India is using the deal to nudge things towards its own domestic priorities, namely shifting away from fossil fuels.
Ah, okay. So what about electric vehicles then?
That's the other side of the coin. For zero-emission vehicles, so electric, hybrid, even hydrogen-powered cars, the quota starts smaller maybe. There's a longer ramp-up. But after the first 5 years, the total annual quota steadily climbs. It reaches 22,000 units by the 15th year.
I see. So the deal basically signals that the real long-term high-volume access is for green vehicles. Aligns perfectly with India's climate commitments.
Exactly. It's trade policy driving environmental policy baked right in.
Smart. And beyond cars and whiskey.
Yeah.
Other UK consumer stuff.
Yeah, things like UK cosmetics, perfumes, toiletries, even soft drinks, chocolates, biscuits, they'll all see tariffs coming down in fuses. Perfumes, for instance, duties get cut in half.
Okay, so that's the good side. You said this deal is comprehensive. Let's shift gears to services. It covers, 11 service sectors for India, 12 for the UK?
Right. And services, especially the movement of professionals, this is where some really novel aspects come in. The UK has definitely opened up visa routes more for what they call contractual service suppliers and independent professionals. That's huge for India's IT sector, IT-enabled services, and other professional services firms.
And there was that one really specific detail about mobility that caught everyone's eye.
Ah, yes. You mean the yoga teachers.
That's the one.
Yeah, it's quite something. It shows just how detailed these talks got. They've literally created new, specific immigration routes capped at 1,800 people per year total for these new routes. And the examples given include professions like yoga teachers and classical musicians.
A specific quota for yoga teachers in a multi-billion-dollar trade agreement. It sounds slightly absurd. But what does a detail like that actually tell us about the negotiations?
It tells you everything was on the table, doesn't it? It suggests that UK was maybe willing to concede on these very specific, perhaps culturally significant requests from India, possibly in return for broader access in areas like finance or legal services. It shows the granular give and take.
Micromobility rules alongside macroeconomic shifts.
Yeah.
Okay. What else on the financial or mobility side?
Well, there's also this planned double contribution convention. It's still being negotiated separately, I think, but the idea is to stop temporary Indian workers in the UK and their employers from having to pay Social Security contributions in both countries.
Ah, like avoiding double taxation, but for Social Security.
Exactly, for up to 3 years. That should make things simpler and, crucially, boost the amount of money workers can send back home as remittances.
And underpinning all this is the existing financial relationship, which is already pretty deep, isn't it?
Oh, yeah. The UK is, the 6th largest source of foreign direct investment, FDI, into India. Accounts for about 5% of the total. Same for foreign portfolio investors. FPI's UK-based funds hold about 5% of assets under custody in India.
And it flows the other way, too.
Absolutely. You've got nearly 1,000 Indian companies operating in the UK now. 971, I think, was the number. And they employ over 1 million people there. So this CETA isn't starting from scratch. It's building on really strong existing ties.
Okay, so we've done goods, we've done services and mobility. But you mentioned this deal is comprehensive. What makes it truly deep? You mentioned the regulatory stuff, the non-tariff chapters.
Yes, this is where you see the ambition for real integration, beyond just cutting taxes on imports. There are entirely new chapters here for India. Take the digital trade chapter.
What's in that?
Things you'd expect, maybe, like rules for facilitating trade, using electronic means, promoting open government data, protecting online consumers, but also, crucially, protections for source code.
Ah, protecting source code. That must be a massive win for India's IT giants, right? Ensures companies doing projects don't have to hand over their core intellectual property.
Precisely. But maybe the most interesting bit in that digital chapter is this forward-looking review mechanism on data.
Explain that. What does it do?
Basically, it says if either India or the UK strikes a new deal with some other country, say, the UK does a big data deal with the US, and that deal touches on things like cross-border data flows, data protection standards, or data localization rules.
Okay.
Then the other CETA partner, India in this case, has the right to call for a review of how that new external deal impacts the CETA data rules.
So it's like a built-in alarm system.
Yeah.
To stop one side's deal with someone else from accidentally undermining the India-UK digital trade rules.
Kind of, yeah. It's a way to try and keep their digital regulations somewhat aligned over time, or at least manage divergence. It's a hedge against future changes in the global digital landscape. Pretty forward-thinking.
Very interesting. Another huge area included is government procurement, right? India's usually kept that quite protected.
Historically, yes, and this is a major step politically. India is opening up its central government procurement market to UK suppliers. That covers contracts for goods, services, and even construction projects.
How open? Are UK firms treated just like Indian firms?
Not quite like domestic firms, but they get significant access. UK suppliers will be treated as what India calls Class 2 local suppliers, provided their product or service has at least 20% UK origin content.
20% UK content. And what does that access mean in practice?
Well, some reports estimate this could give UK companies a shot at around 40,000 high-value Indian government contracts. It's potentially a very big market opening.
Opening up government tenders like that must be politically tricky anywhere. What kind of domestic reaction or controversy might this stir up in India? Are small Indian businesses worried?
That's exactly the flashpoint. The main concern is always the impact on India's own small and medium enterprises, SMEs. They've often benefited from procurement policies that favored local suppliers.
Right.
The Indian government's argument is that the 20% UK content threshold still offers some protection, ensuring some local value add. But yeah, it definitely represents a shift towards more open competition, moving away from protectionism in procurement. Domestic industry groups will be watching very closely to see how it plays out.
Okay. And then there are these chapters that sound really new for an Indian trade deal: environment, labor, and gender, the separate chapters.
Yes, dedicated separate chapters on all three. That is genuinely groundbreaking for India in a trade agreement context. It signals they're willing to engage on these trade and sustainability issues at a much higher level, covering things like climate change commitments, promoting decent work, tackling forced labor.
That sounds like a big win for the UK side, pushing for these higher standards.
Diplomatically, yes. It aligns with the UK's push for values in its trade policy, but there's a really important caveat here regarding enforcement.
Ah, okay. What's the catch?
The catch is that the commitments made in these specific chapters, environment, labor, gender, they are explicitly excluded from the main dispute settlement mechanism of the CETA.
Excluded. So what happens if one side believes the other is violating a labor commitment? Say, using forced labor in factories making goods for export under CETA. Is there any actual consequence, any teeth in the agreement for these chapters?
The teeth are, let's say, diplomatic rather than financial. It means these issues are subject to discussion, consultation, maybe review panels between the governments, but crucially, they cannot lead to the kind of cross-retaliation you see in standard trade disputes where one country slaps sanctions or tariffs on the other's goods as punishment.
I see. So it's more about naming and shaming, political pressure rather than direct trade penalties.
Essentially, yes. It looks like a compromise. India agreed to include the chapters, signaling commitment on the issues, which is politically significant. But it seems they weren't willing to subject their domestic labor laws or environmental regulations to binding arbitration by the main CETA trade tribunal, which could have led to sanctions. They maintain sovereignty there.
Interesting balance. And alongside all that, there's also a chapter on innovation. Another first for India.
That's right. A dedicated chapter specifically focused on fostering innovation collaboration. yet another sign of the depth here.
Okay, so let's step back. We've covered a lot of ground. What's the big picture strategic meaning of this whole CETA deal?
Well, for India, it really marks a significant strategic pivot. They seem to be moving away from huge, complex multilateral deals like RCEP, which they pulled out of, remember?
Right.
And instead, they're focusing on forging these deeper, high-standard bilateral agreements, particularly with major high-income economies like the UK. It's a different approach.
And for the UK?
For the UK, especially in the post-Brexit context, this is massive. It's arguably their largest, most economically significant new trade deal signed since leaving the EU, a cornerstone of their global Britain strategy, you could say.
So it really does set the stage for the next decade or two of their economic relationship. But we should probably remind you, the listener, that just because it's signed doesn't mean it's active yet, right?
Absolutely crucial point. Signing is done, the hard yards of negotiation are over, but now comes ratification. Both the Indian and UK parliaments need to formally approve it.
And that takes time. If we look at the UK's recent deals with Australia and New Zealand, how long did that process take?
Yeah, good comparison. Those took roughly 15 to 17 months from the signing date until they actually came into force. So we should probably expect a similar kind of timeline here for CETA.
So sometime likely in 2026 or maybe even early 2027 before this actually starts changing things on the ground.
Exactly. The really complex work of actually implementing this deal, getting all the systems ready, that's really just beginning now.
Okay, so we started off talking about that cockpit announcement and the historical jokes it sparked, the ghosts of the East India Company. Let's end with a thought looking forward.
Right.
Given that the UK is explicitly using this FTA to help revive its own economy, and India, as we said, is projected to be the world's third largest economy by 2028. Fast forward 50 years, imagine the UK's economic health then is quite heavily reliant on the success of these kinds of partnerships with India. What might the public humor, the memes, look like then? Will the historical irony have flipped entirely?
That's a fascinating question to ponder. How will that power dynamic look and be perceived half a century from now?
Something for you to think about until our next deep dive.